Hello, everyone, and we're going to look at personality now in a little bit more detailed and some different aspects of personality. And let's take a look at what does our textbook state about personality. Here's some of the details. Overview, we're going to look at some of the classic perspectives on personality, and then contemporary, the more modern perspectives on personality. Here's a definition. Now remember, what you need to know is everything that is in red. That's what you're going to need to know, and you may want to write down. Anything that is blue is simply just additional information, just things that are help with the term or the definition, I should say. So personality, an individual's characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. It's a good definition. Two historically significant personality theories are Freud's psychoanalytic theory, and we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail. Psychodynamic theorists inspired by Freud. And there are the humanistic theories, and these two broad perspectives provided inspiration for later theorists of trait and social cognitive. So we're going to look at all of these things. We're going to look at all of these things in a little bit more detail, and then when they are in red, you can write it down to make sure you're familiar with the definition. So let's continue with the chapter. Psychodynamic, focus on the dynamic interaction between the conscious and the unconscious. The humanistic approach, focus on the inner capabilities for growth. Trait theories examine characteristic patterns. Social cognitive theories explore the interaction between traits and social context. So we'll get into all of those. First, let's start with term you need to know, psychodynamic theories. Okay, it says here, behavior is a dynamic interaction between the unconscious and the conscious mind. So how do we know that there is an unconscious mind? How do we know that there are things going on within our brain and our mind at all times? Well, if you think about it, your brain is working all the time. And what is proof of that? The proof of that is that we dream. We dream, and that is a little way we can tap into the unconscious and say, hey, look, our brain is actually always working. For example, whenever I dream, I usually have dreams of my grandmother. My grandmother passed away a long time ago, but she's in there. She's in my mind, and I've never forgotten her, and I probably never will, and I probably shouldn't. Here's Sigmund Freud. So he observed that patients whose disorders had no clear physical explanation. He concluded that their problems reflected unacceptable thoughts and feelings hidden away in the unconscious mind. And that's kind of where we kind of got the whole process of the unconscious mind from Sigmund Freud. Here's the term, unconscious. Information processing of which we are unaware. So it is always going on, and it's something that we edit on a daily basis. And some of us edit it more than others. And I'm sure you know individuals that have very high editing, filtering skills, if you will, and other individuals don't. Freud believed in the mind's three systems. So this is one of his biggest contributions to psychology. Sigmund Freud said a lot of things that were true, a lot of things that are not true. However, what he did state is still taught today. And here's one of the biggest contributions that he gave to psychology, and that's the concept of the id. It's the unconscious energy. Strives to satisfy basic sexual and aggressive drives. It's the pleasure principle, immediate gratification. When you think of a child that hasn't been disciplined, if you think of a child that hasn't been raised properly, they're basically acting off of their id. They want that. They're not going to share. They're going to take away what they want. So instead of sharing toys, they'll just yell and scream and fight and scratch. The id is the basic version of ourselves that just wants to please and wants immediate gratification. Now, if you take that child and if you raise them properly and you teach them manners and you teach them saying please and thank you and the concept of long-term goals, then what they're going to learn is about the ego. Seeks to realistically gratify the id's impulses to bring long-term pleasure. It gives you a realistic way of achieving your goals. You get a job. You do things the right way. You attain your goals. It's still getting gratification, but it's doing it in a very realistic way. And it's about the long-term goals, not the things you can do right then and there that will ultimately end up getting you in trouble. So I always remember it as id. It's the shortest, ID. It's immediate. And then when you work on yourself, you work up to the ego, 3 letters. And if you keep working on yourself, you're going to get to the super version of yourself. Focuses on ideal behavior, acts as a moral conscience. What that's saying is, it's the version of you that donates to charity. It's the version of you that's in a club to help the less fortunate, or in a club to help raise money for a scholarship. If you ultimately work on yourself, you will be the very best version of yourself. Now, all of us know someone that is maybe still in this. They don't think in long-term goals. Most of us are right here. However, the very best of us try to get to the super ego, where we can become the very best version of ourself. Freud's idea of the mind's structure here. So if we look at the ego, this is the basically the edited version of ourselves with a filter, and we're planning long-term goals. This is the very best version of ourselves. Now, luckily, if we are lucky, we do get a large portion that is out in the world, right? The super ego, the one that is helping charities and giving back to the community. But look at all this unconscious energy, the id. It's below the surface. This is all the stuff that we don't get to see and maybe pops in our dreams. And again, for some people, the id actually pops out into the surface. But for the majority of us, it stays below the surface, and we don't see it in society. So, let's look at contemporary psychodynamic theorists and therapists. Now, when it comes to Freud, remember, contemporary, meaning modern day, psychodynamic theorists, not all of them share Freud's strong focus on sex as the basis of personality. Along with psychologists generally, they view mental life as primarily unconscious, meaning a lot of what's going on is beneath the view. And they do agree with Freud that we often struggle with inner conflicts among our wishes, fears, and our values. So there's always that constant struggle between the id and the ego every day. And again, contemporary psychodynamic theorists contend that childhood social experiences influence adult personality and attachment patterns. So this is a look at how modern day theorists and therapists view Freud in reference to what he stated. How do we tap into the id? Well, we could use free association, exploring the unconscious, in which the person relaxes and says whatever comes to mind. And sometimes you may have seen free association in movies where they ask someone to say the first thing that comes to your mind when I show you this photo, or say the first thing that comes to your mind when I say this word. This is an example of free association, and it is a way of tapping into the unconscious. There are many different types of exercises. Sometimes you've seen exercises where someone will say a word and then you say the first things that pop into your mind. But one of the most popular or well-publicized ways of tapping into the id is through the Rorschach test. It seeks to identify people's inner feelings by analyzing their interpretations of the ink blots. There are 10 ink blots, and they show you photos, and you simply state what comes into your mind. And this is a way of tapping into your id, or the unconscious mind. Now, one thing I do want to state is I don't want you to think that if you do the Rorschach test, oh, you're going to know everything that there is to know about another human being. Once you do this test, that's it. You know another person completely. That's not how this test works. This is part of a series of tests in which to get a full development of an individual's personality. So I don't want you to think, oh, well, if you do this one test, then you'll understand everything that there is to know. It doesn't work that way.